I never imagined that the moment my life would finally change would happen in a church full of flowers, polite smiles, and people who thought they knew my family. But that reckoning came much later. Long before the uniforms, the medals, or the rank stitched onto my shoulders, there was a little girl named Victoria Hayes, learning how to make herself smaller in a house where love came with conditions. I didn't know it then, but the patterns were already there, laid out quietly, the way cracks form in glass long before it finally shatters. From the outside, my childhood looked ordinary. A neat suburban home. Family dinners. School photos on the wall. But inside that house, everything revolved around my father's approval, and that approval was rationed carefully, like something too precious to be wasted on the wrong child. My brother seemed to receive it effortlessly. My sister learned how to survive on polite nods and silence. I learned early that no matter how hard I tried, I was always just a little off. A little too loud. A little too sensitive. A little too ambitious for my own good. When I brought home straight A's in elementary school, my father glanced at the report card and said my brother had done better in math. When I scored the winning goal in a weekend soccer game, he mentioned how another kid's team had gone further. Every achievement I offered was met with a comparison that left me wondering what invisible standard I was failing to meet. Nothing was ever openly cruel. That's what made it so effective. It was subtle. Constant. A steady erosion of confidence that taught me not to expect praise, only correction. The favoritism showed up in small, unmistakable ways. My siblings got new bikes. I inherited whatever still rolled. They got driving lessons at 16. I was told I'd figure it out. When college brochures arrived, my father sat with my sister and talked through her options. Mine were left on the counter like junk mail. "You're independent," he said whenever I asked about my future. "You always land on your feet." I mistook that for faith. It took years to realize it was indifference. By the time I was a teenager, the mocking had become routine. Debate club was arguing for sport. Volunteering at an animal shelter was playing around instead of working. Every interest I had that didn't align with his idea of success was dismissed with a smirk or a cutting remark. My mother noticed. I saw it in the warning "consider" she shot across the dinner table, but she never intervened. In our house, challenging my father wasn't worth the fallout. Silence was safer. I remember the moment something in me cracked. I was 15 and working my first job, bagging groceries after school. I came home exhausted and proud, waving my first paycheck like proof that I was responsible, capable, worth noticing. My father didn't even look up from the paper. "About time you started pulling your weight," he said. "Your sister's been working for years." The paper shook slightly in his hands as he folded it, and my excitement collapsed into something small and embarrassing. That paycheck felt lighter, like it had lost value just by being seen. Living in that house meant learning to read moods like weather. The way he set his shoulders told me whether dinner would be quiet or explosive. The way he folded the newspaper determined whether it was a good night to speak or disappear. When he snapped, and I flinched, he told me I was too sensitive. That the world would eat me alive if I didn't toughen up. But toughening up, in his eyes, meant becoming invisible. Don't ask for much. Don't challenge anything. Don't take up space. I tried everything to earn his respect. I joined sports he liked. I took classes I didn't care about. I dated boys he approved of and kept my real opinions tucked away. None of it worked. If I mirrored his interests, he interrogated me like I was faking it. If I stayed quiet, he accused me of sulking. "What's wrong with you?" became his favorite question. It implied that something fundamental in me was broken, that I was a problem he never asked for. The worst part wasn't the criticism. It was realizing that nothing I did would ever be enough. I saw it in his eyes at school events, where he arrived late, left early, and spent most of the time talking about other kids' accomplishments. Once, when my art teacher praised a painting I'd done, he laughed and said he didn't know where I got that from, as if my talent were an accident, not something worth claiming. By senior year of high school, the distance between us felt permanent. Conversations were tense. Requests for support were met with sighs and rolled eyes. I started making plans without telling him. College applications filled out in secret. Scholarship essays written late at night. Dreams built quietly, away from his reach. I told myself this was normal. That all families struggled. That blood meant something unbreakable. I was wrong. The fight that ended everything started over something small, the way these things always do. I applied for a fully funded leadership program in another state, a summer opportunity focused on public service. I didn't ask permission. I didn't even think I'd get in. When the acceptance letter arrived, I left it on my desk. My father found it before I could explain. He confronted me at dinner, in front of everyone. "Who do you think you are making decisions like this without your family?" His voice had that sharp edge that meant there would be no reasoning with him. I tried to explain deadlines, competitiveness, how rare the opportunity was. Each word only made him angrier. "You think you're better than us," he said, standing now. "You think you can do whatever you want." Something in me refused to fold. "I'm trying to build a future," I said. "Isn't that what you always told me to do?" The silence afterward was heavy. Then he delivered the words that changed my life. Calm. Final. Practiced. If you want to make adult decisions, you can live with adult consequences. Pack your things. You have until morning. No one defended me. My mother went pale. My siblings stared at their plates. I went to my room and packed my life into garbage bags and a single suitcase. Clothes. Books. A few things that felt like mine. I waited for someone to knock on my door. No one did. In the morning, I stood by the front door, heart pounding, hoping for a miracle. My father read the newspaper. My mother washed dishes. The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded like an ending. I was 18 years old, homeless, and completely alone. Standing on that porch, the morning air sharp in my lungs, I made a promise I didn't yet know how to keep. I would not let this define me. I didn't know then that it would take nearly 2 decades to prove it, or that the girl being thrown out with her life in bags would one day become a woman who no one could dismiss again. This was only the beginning. And the world was about to find out what happens when the wrong person is underestimated. The first weeks after I was thrown out blurred together in a haze of shock and survival. I moved between friends' couches, spare rooms, and nights spent sitting in my car, convincing myself it was temporary. Everyone was kind at first. They offered sympathy, extra blankets, space on the floor. But even the most generous kindness has an expiration date. After a while, people stop asking how you're doing and start asking what your plan is. I didn't have one. I was 18, cut loose from my family, and pretending not to be terrified. I eventually found a studio apartment above a pizza shop, the kind of place with thin walls, unreliable heat, and the constant smell of grease in the hallway. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I guarded that independence like it could disappear if I stopped paying attention. I worked long shifts waiting tables at a diner nearby, pouring coffee, memorizing orders, learning how to smile through exhaustion. Some customers were kind. Others treated me like furniture. But the job paid just enough to keep the lights on, and more importantly, it gave me structure. A place to be. A reason to get up. The loneliness hit hardest in quiet moments. Standing alone in the grocery store, choosing the cheapest food, realizing no one cared if I ate or not. My 18th birthday came and went without a single call or card. I bought myself a cupcake and ate it on the edge of my bed, telling myself this was freedom, not abandonment. Some nights I believed it. Other nights, the silence pressed so hard on my chest it felt physical. I replayed that final fight endlessly, rewriting it in my head. If I'd explained better. If I'd apologized sooner. If I'd been quieter, or stronger, or different. But every version ended the same way. The truth was brutal and simple. He had been waiting for an excuse. Leaving hadn't been my failure. It had been his decision. 6 months after I left, something shifted. I was walking home after a long shift, feet aching, mind numb, when I passed a military recruiting office. I'd walked by it dozens of times before without noticing. That night, I stopped. The posters showed young men and women in uniform, standing straight, looking like they belonged somewhere. They looked purposeful. Respected. Needed. For the first time in months, I felt something unfamiliar rise in my chest. Possibility. I didn't go in right away. I walked past that office for weeks, pretending I was just curious. When I finally stepped inside, the recruiter didn't look at me like I was a problem or a burden. She listened. She explained options. Education benefits. Structure. A career instead of just a job. The military becomes your family, she said, casually, like it was obvious. That sentence lodged itself deep in my chest. I signed the papers a month later. Basic training started 3 months after that. Packing for it was easy. My life already fit into a few bags. The night before I left, I drove past my childhood home. I didn't stop. I didn't go inside. I just looked at it, smaller than I remembered, less powerful. That house had shaped me, but it no longer owned me. I drove away without looking back. Basic training stripped me down to nothing. Sleep deprivation. Endless drills. Yelling that rattled your bones. But for the first time in my life, the pressure wasn't personal. The expectations were clear. Meet the standard or don't. Earn your place or fall behind. No guessing games. No shifting goalposts. I thrived. The girl who'd been called too sensitive learned she could run farther, push harder, and endure more than she ever imagined. My unit became my first real family. We suffered together. We covered for each other. Trust wasn't demanded. It was earned, day by day. When I graduated, there was no one in the stands cheering for me. That absence hurt. But it also clarified something important. Everything I had achieved was mine alone. No one could take credit for it. No one could take it away. I chose military police, drawn to the idea of order and accountability. The training was demanding, but I found I had a natural instinct for leadership. I paid attention. I protected my people. I didn't ask anyone to do something I wouldn't do myself. My first overseas assignment came quickly, and with it, responsibility that felt heavy but right. Promotions followed. Corporal. Sergeant. Staff sergeant. Each rank stitched onto my uniform felt like proof that I wasn't broken. I'd never been broken. I'd just been in the wrong environment. The years moved fast after that. Deployments blurred together. Long days. High stakes. Decisions that mattered. I learned how to lead under pressure, how to stay calm when everything around you is chaos. I learned how to carry other people's lives in my hands without letting fear take over. Somewhere along the way, survival turned into purpose. I wasn't proving my father wrong anymore. I was building something that stood on its own. By my 10th year, I was an officer with a reputation for getting difficult jobs done. I earned respect the hard way, through consistency and integrity. No one cared where I came from. They cared whether I could lead. And I could. I was good at it. That realization changed everything. The invitation arrived 15 years after I'd been thrown out. My brother's wedding. Elegant paper. Careful handwriting. A polite line at the bottom. We'd love to have you there if you can make it. No apology. No explanation. Just an assumption that time had smoothed over everything. I stared at that envelope for a long time, weighing whether going back was worth reopening wounds I'd worked so hard to heal. In the end, curiosity won. I wasn't going back as the girl they dismissed. I was going back as someone they no longer controlled. I requested leave. Bought a ticket. Packed my dress uniform. I told myself this wasn't about reconciliation. It was about closure. When I walked into that church, heads turned. Not because they recognized me, but because a woman in uniform carries a certain weight. My mother saw me first. Shock flickered across her face. My sister followed her gaze, eyes wide. No one approached me. That was fine. I hadn't come for comfort. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and music. Then came the reception. And that's when I saw my father across the room. Older. Grayer. Still carrying himself like the final authority. Our eyes met. For a moment, I felt 18 again. Then I remembered who I was now. He looked away first. Dinner was polite. Conversations careful. People asked about my work, their expressions shifting as they realized I wasn't just visiting from some vague government job. And then my father stood to speak. Glass raised. Voice confident. I want to acknowledge my daughter, he said. She wouldn't even be here without charity. The room went quiet. Old instincts flared. The urge to shrink. To disappear. But before I could respond, someone else stood up. Someone unexpected. My sister-in-law took the microphone. Please stand for Brigadier General Victoria Hayes, she said calmly. The shift was immediate. Confusion turned into respect. Applause filled the room. My father's face drained of color. He was trapped in his own moment, exposed by the truth he hadn't bothered to learn. I stood, nodded once, and sat back down. I didn't need to say anything else. In that moment, something inside me settled. I wasn't invisible anymore. And I never would be again. The reckoning had come. And this time, I was ready for what came next. The rest of the reception passed in a strange, weightless haze. People who hadn't noticed me all night suddenly wanted to shake my hand, ask questions, tell me how impressive my career sounded. Compliments came easily once my worth had been publicly validated. I accepted them politely, but something inside me had already moved on. I wasn't there for their approval. I had stopped needing that a long time ago. Across the room, my father avoided eye contact, shrinking into conversations that suddenly looked forced and uncomfortable. For the first time I could remember, he didn't control the room. And I realized I felt nothing about it. No triumph. No anger. Just clarity. My mother approached me near the end of the night. She looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "I should have said that years ago." The words landed gently. They didn't erase the past, but they acknowledged it. I thanked her. That was all I had to give. Forgiveness, I had learned, isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's simply choosing not to carry bitterness any longer. My father never came over. He never apologized. He never explained himself. And that was its own answer. I left the reception early, still in uniform, walking out alone the same way I had walked in. But this time, I wasn't carrying old shame with me. I drove away knowing that whatever unresolved feelings remained belonged to him, not me. I had already done the work of becoming whole. The morning after the wedding, I flew back to my base. Life resumed its familiar rhythm. Briefings. Training. Decisions that mattered. Responsibility that felt earned. I thought the wedding would be the end of that chapter, but life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. A few weeks later, I received an email from my sister-in-law, Rebecca. She apologized for my father's behavior and thanked me for how I handled myself. Her message was thoughtful, sincere. Over time, those emails turned into conversations. She asked about my work. I asked about her teaching. Slowly, cautiously, a bridge formed where none had existed before. Through Rebecca, I learned bits and pieces about my family. My sister had moved across the country and built a life she loved. My brother had started questioning the dynamics we grew up with, seeing them through adult eyes for the first time. Even my mother, I heard, was finding her voice later in life. It was strange, realizing that growth hadn't stopped with me. We had all been shaped by the same household, but we were finally stepping out of its shadow in our own ways. Then came the phone call I never expected. My father had suffered a heart attack. He survived, but barely. The news stirred complicated emotions I hadn't felt in years. Concern. Distance. A sense of inevitability. He asked about me, Rebecca said. I didn't rush home. I didn't owe anyone that. Instead, I sent flowers with a simple card wishing him recovery. It was more compassion than I had ever been shown, and exactly as much as I was ready to offer. Months later, a letter arrived. His handwriting was shaky, unfamiliar. Inside were words I never thought I'd read. He admitted he had been wrong. That his idea of love had been tied to control. That throwing me out had been a failure, not a lesson. He wrote that he had followed my career from afar, reading about women in leadership, wondering if one of them was me. He said he was proud, even though he no longer felt entitled to say so. I read that letter slowly, more than once. It didn't fix the past. But it changed how I carried it. I wrote back. Not a confession. Not a reconciliation. Just the truth. I told him I had built a life I was proud of. That I had found peace. That I wished him well. And that was enough. We exchanged a few letters after that. Careful. Respectful. Limited. Sometimes closure doesn't look like a reunion. Sometimes it looks like boundaries that finally hold. A few years later, I stood in a quiet ceremony as I was promoted again. Another star. Another step forward. As my name was called, I thought about the girl who had packed her life into garbage bags and stepped onto a porch with nowhere to go. I thought about the nights she cried herself to sleep, convinced she wasn't enough. I wished I could tell her what I know now. That rejection doesn't mean you're unworthy. Sometimes it means you're standing in a place that can't contain who you're becoming. Looking back, being thrown out at 18 was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to grow without permission. To define myself without waiting for approval. To build strength instead of chasing validation. The family I lost taught me what conditional love looks like. The family I found taught me what respect feels like. If you've ever been dismissed by someone who should have protected you, hear this. Their inability to see your value does not diminish it. Some people will only recognize your worth once you stop asking them to. And by then, you may no longer need their recognition at all. If this story resonated with you, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away to become who you were meant to be? Have you ever been underestimated, only to realize later that it was your greatest advantage? Share your story in the comments. You are not alone. And if you believe in setting boundaries, reclaiming your worth, and choosing growth over approval, tap like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. There are more stories like this ahead.